All right, welcome back, everyone. I'm really excited to have you all here today. So today we're here with a special guest, Archie Stapleton from MPI Education. Welcome to the channel.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I reached out to you on LinkedIn because I saw a bunch of your posts about Ethics Bowl, right? And that just sounds like really fascinating to me. It's something I've always wanted to kind of like learn a little bit more about. So can you tell us a little bit about who you are and how you got into kind of Ethics Bowl?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's actually the Ethics Bowl, and then there's the Ethics Olympiad, and then there's different competitions that are sort of in this same format, but it's all in the same category. So it's worth talking about Ethics Bowl as well. Um,
Okay.
I think the first time I was introduced to it was when I was 15 in my high school in Perth, Australia, when my Australian teacher called Matthew Wills, he brought the Ethics Olympiad to Australia as like the Australian version of the Ethics Bowl, which came to exist in America first. And I think the very first thing was me and my brother and like two other people from our school doing an online version with some like Princeton related high school team, some team in America on a Thursday
Okay.
afternoon. And we ran our first ever ethics Olympiad with them. And it was very exciting. I'd always been a massive debate nut and did Australian styles of debate. But then getting introduced to this sort of other style, which is more about positive discourse and not just about destroying your opponents, which is, I'll admit, very fun, was sort of a breath of fresh air, to be honest.
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, we talked to you a bit about this the other day. That to me is like the coolest thing about this, that you can actually accept somebody's argument as a valid and move on and be productive with it. That's so great. I feel like graciousness does not exist in like traditional American competitive debate, right? It's a lot of fun. Cool. So
That's
tell us a little bit about your experience in debate then. Where to kind of go from there when you got started?
Yeah, well, honestly, if I'm going all the way back to the beginning, my grandfather was like the was a national champion debater in Canada. Half my family's Canadian. So it starts from there. My mum then did competitive debating. My older brother did it. And in the year when he started high school and I was in primary school, I would go and watch him debating. And that like was my first real kick in the teeth of like, oh, this thing's exciting. And then I just did it obsessively throughout high school. Did it, was in the Western Australian state team for the Australian Nationals. And then when I moved to Vancouver, Canada, I was in my second year, the training director for the University of British Columbia Debating Society. And then I was offered my first job, and the rest is really history. And I stopped doing competitive debating and started coaching full time when I was about 20.
Okay. And so how is debate different in like Australia and Canada versus the United States?
Yeah, I mean, look, the parliamentary styles of that all stem from Britain, like British parliamentary, and then they call it Australs or World Schools in Australia, and then obviously Canadian parliamentary as well. These are the fundamental difference is that they're impromptu. So unlike public forum or policy or even LD, like all of these sort of prepped styles where you come with evidence, rather you're just given an hour to prepare for a tournament in Australs at least. In BP, it's 15 minutes, and you're graded not just on your capacity to win arguments, but also your presentation style, which I think is something that is largely lost in American debate. I don't have a
Not even
strong,
largely, completely
completely
lost, at
lost.
least at the highest levels. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not even close. I mean, certainly like you can never take out the persuasive element in terms of like somebody believing that you have won like a line by line argument. But I think people like oddly pride themselves on their ability to try to like completely take out the performative aspect of it,
Mhm.
at least at like TOC tech debate. That's interesting. So are there any other kind of differences you've seen?
I think the absence of principled arguments, as I've seen it, at least in public forum, which is the American style that I've spent most time with. And then even I haven't seen a lot of LD, so I can't really talk to that. I know you're much more aware of this, but like the idea of having a basic principled argument at the top of a case where you might say like the government has some kind of responsibility, or free speech is like just fundamentally important, without impacting it out into sort of terminal impacts of billions of people dying of nuclear disaster. That is something that I don't see in North America, but I do see a lot more in Australia.
So you would say like they don't assume utilitarianism in most debates, you would say?
I think it's that they're pluralistic, and you can be a pluralist. So you can start with a principled argument, and then if you sufficiently win the principled argument, you can really win a debate with that. If the other team doesn't have a sufficient response to some kind of fundamental ground level principle, But then most debates should, I think, come down to a practical clash at the end of it anyway. So there's definitely utilitarianism embedded in every debate, but just not
Right.
only utilitarianism. Yeah.
That's interesting. So yeah, we're actually having a bit of a revolution recently in public forum in the United States. It's been very cool, where people are trying to like kind of bring normative ethics into it, right? I'll admit it's, you know, people trying to like not want to have to defend consequences and answer things, right? So, you know, reading a lot of like relatively like tricky kind of deontic frameworks, you know, but it's at least cool to see them starting to kind of consider things beyond just utilitarianism for like evaluative scopes for arguments. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. So I think that's like a kind of great transition into like what Ethics Olympiad is, right? So what kind of philosophical discussions are you having, and what does that format look like?
Oh, there's so many good ones.
I
This is
feel
the
like
exciting thing.
those are two way too big of questions, right? I just asked like two 30-minute questions. I feel bad. Pick one and we'll go from there, right?
Okay, let's start with the format then, I guess, very briefly, just to give people a really clear sense. So, I mean, the way it happens is that you get given 8 cases when you sign up for the competition. There's sort of like at least 8 weeks in advance, ideally, but you know, you could do it in 6. Some teams spend like 3 or 4 months preparing. You get 8 cases that are all about a page long, and they're on a range of different topics. Like, what's the one we've just written? I mean, there's one about whether the people who received money as a charitable organization from FTX and then it went bust, obviously, should they give the money back to FTX to redistribute to the people who gave it to them? Like that alone is such a rich question.
Ethical questions.
It's literally just applied ethics, like exactly what you'd see in sort of, you know, applied animal ethics, environmental ethics. It is politics. It's international relations, it's economics, it's like everything you can imagine in debate, but just like the cases themselves are sort of 4 paragraphs long, and they present ideas on both sides. And then the question is going to be like more complex than you'd normally get in a debate question. It won't be simple. And then you have to have a nuanced thesis to answer it. So yeah, that's the difference. And then when you get into a round, there's sort of team A and team B. And team A is going to give a 5-minute presentation on a question that they get in the round. They get 3 minutes of prep, then they give a 5-minute presentation. In that presentation, they are required to give a counter argument to their own position and then discharge it. So you have to be aware enough of what the other team, what like the best argument is on the other side, which means that you have to have a really, really good thesis that you can defend against anything. Then team B gets a little prep time, and then they give 3 minutes of commentary. And the commentary doesn't have to be rebuttal. It can be, and it probably should be a little bit, like you should find problems with the arguments made, but it can also be like supporting things. It can be like, oh, have you considered this other example that actually supports your case? Or what if you nuanced your ethical theory like this and like added this other element to your utilitarian analysis? Like, have you ever thought about the difference between preference and act utilitarian? All of these sort of things, they can do whatever they want in the commentary. They don't have to present their own position. They don't even have to have a thesis. Team A then responds to that. And then the best part is 7 minutes of judges' questions, where this like the PhD judges that we bring in basically, or professors.
They can just question whoever they want in the round.
They question team A only, the presenting team, because we're going to reverse the whole thing for the second half of the round with a new case, same 2 teams, but they swap sides. So then it's exactly paralleled with a new case. And this 7 minutes of judges' questions is literally like, they can ask the most difficult possible counter examples or critical things, like, can you actually, you know, you use Kantian deontology in your introduction. Like, can you just tell me a little bit more about that? They can just sort of.
Do they like scout the judges at all? Because in like American debate, we're figuring out who our judges are before. Like, will they do the same thing?
Yeah, we have a pool of judges who've now judged multiple tournaments, and who we train every single time for any updates we think we need to bring to the tournament. You know, we want to add more feedback in this regard or that regard. We're changing the judging structure. We always bring in our judges beforehand, and they're all high level philosophy people. We try to find people who have a background as well in speech and debate, because that does help. But they're all high level philosophers in their own regard.
That's very interesting. That's cool. So then what are they judging? What's their judging criteria ultimately?
So that you can look at the criteria, but for a presentation, there are 3 parts. It's clarity and consistency. So I think of that as how good your structure and formatting is, and not contradicting yourself and that kind of thing. Second, there's like philosophical depth. That's how good your theories are, how good your arguments are. And then there's sort of engaging with contrary positions. So that's your counter argument, because you don't want to run a straw man counter argument where you're just bringing something up that's like easy to defeat. You have to bring up the strongest possible thing and then integrate it into your case. So that's the 15 marks for the presentation. The rest of it is sort of left pretty open, and it's about philosophical contribution to the round. It becomes clear once you've seen a bunch of these what a good team looks like, and it's really the capacity to engage critically, logically, and then there are some tools in philosophy that you kind of do have to learn to be at the highest level of this, in terms of like, how do you criticize an ethical theory? Well, you come up with a counterexample that demonstrates that our intuitions are contrary to what the ethical theory would recommend in that same case, and that should be evidence against the theory. That kind of understanding of how it works is something that judges are looking for.
So you'll have like actual like deep meta ethical debates, like in terms of the back and forth?
That is a good question. So in terms of metaethics, which for anyone who isn't like well on top of their philosophy, is the question of what ethical language actually means. Like when I say the phrase, this isn't for you, of course, but when I say the phrase like killing a child is bad, like what does that actually mean? Because people have big disagreements about what that means. Does it refer to something actually in the world? Like there's some statement, it is bad to kill children, like written in the stars somewhere by a god? That would be like one metaethical position, a realist position. Or is it just an expression of my emotional reaction to this horrific event? That would be an emotivist, non-realist perspective. So that's the meta-ethical question about what ethical language really refers to. And I would say that we avoid that for the most part in an Olympiad round. Because if you start getting into that and you have a team come out and say, well, look, ethics it's all just error theory. Ethics doesn't mean anything. The conversation can be sort of killed in its tracks. You could try it. I'd be keen to see what it looked like when you come to our competition and present some crazy meta-ethics. I think it could mean that we have to evolve, but I think you'd struggle to win like the first time you did that. So normally we go on.
This is so funny to me, right? That you mentioned error theory and you move past it so quickly, right? Because the first time I started learning high school D, I came at it having just like done other activities for a long time, right? And then I'm watching high school D and people are reading like moral skepticism against a util AF, and I'm like, wait. So they just like had like 3 advantages, like 3 different ways they avoided war, solved some econ scenario, and you're just like, no, ethics isn't real, or we can't access it, or however they want to go about it. And I'm just like so confused by what's going on. And it's so funny to me how in like actual traditional academic, philosophy, a lot of times they're just like, I mean, look, yeah, sure, we can't prove it, but like, let's come on. We all have intuitions. Let's move on and like actually talk about ethics and like not get hung up on like this like unprovable thing, right? I love how quickly like it's just like, nah, we'll have a real debate. Like it's fun.
Exactly.
I think that LD needs a little more of that sometimes, honestly. Yeah.
So can I ask Mike, LD has dropped into this, because I knew about critiques, but I didn't know that there were sort of anti-realism critiques about ethics. There are?
Moral skepticism and moral determinism are just like shockingly common arguments, right? And like the moral determinism stuff is like literally as bad as you'll read like 6 studies that prove like humans are just like witnessing the world instead of like interacting it, like because like maybe our cognition is like a millisecond behind like our action or something like that, right?
The Bay experiments?
Yeah, literally we'll just read like a 3-second line on like the brain experiment and then just be like, that means like nobody can be held culpable for action because they're just witnessing it instead of, and so that's like not motivational or not binding or something like that, right? Yeah, and you'll just read like 10 of these, and then they'll also read like a prioris, right? We'll just read like a ton of like linguistic definitions and be like, that proves the resolution true or false or something like that, just like based on some like, linguistic truth. It is fun, but so it sounds like though what you will do is like actual ethics, right? So if people are like actually interested in the like real discussions, they might like get a lot out of Ethics Olympiad, right? And away from kind of the Wild West that is LD.
A little bit. I don't want to give the impression though that we're like debate haters or tech. Because we're not. I love debate. Yeah, we both love it. Exactly. Like I don't think it exists in opposition to it at all, but it is a different register. So there are literally 5 marks for what do we call it? Like productive discourse and polite discourse. So you can lose marks if you come in and say anything like, well, here are the 3 reasons why we completely disagree with your first contention. Like, 1, 2, 3. No, like you'd always be like, well, have you considered the possibility that, from this perspective, maybe you'd come at this from a different, so it's all couched in much more friendly terms, which is meant to simulate what it's like to be in a philosophy seminar in university, or in fact in a boardroom, or in any kind of like
right? Literally
real
anywhere.
discourse. Yeah.
I've talked to a lot of people in like college admissions, and sometimes they're like a little wary of debaters because they're like, "Why are they arguing with me so much? Like, come on, come on! Like, we don't need you to turn everything into a debate." Yeah, no, that's so interesting to me. It's funny when my wife tells this story a lot. When she was in college, this like British Parliament team was coming around on the circuit and debating all these like policy schools just for fun, right? And they would come and just have a blast. They were hilarious debaters. They understood that debate should be a little bit funny, right? They conceded most things, She was like, yeah, our team just like went for a hedge dis ad, and we're just like yelling about American primacy and extinction for half the debate. And the British guys are just like trolling them, having fun with it, right? And it's just so interesting to me seeing like how like kind of different approaches around the world to argumentation maybe kind of like mirror the culture in some ways, Yeah. Cool. So, why philosophy? Why do you think it's important for students to learn philosophy?
I don't want to get too heady here, but look, philosophy is the natural extension of debate. It's where it goes when you have time to do it, and when you do it in a written format, and you do it when you're just like taking off your aggressive and sort of trying to win hat, and you put on your trying to achieve like some kind of accuracy or truth about the world hat, and you go to the very base of where these arguments go to. It's just like, I think it's the way to engage in the world in the most honest possible fashion. And different types of philosophy do this differently and better or worse. But I think it's just the way to learn how arguments are really structured and not be a sophist, if that's a word, like not engage in sophistry, but engage in real critical thinking, basically. I think it lets you see the world in a unique way that is important, and lets you analyze arguments in what I can only describe as a rational way, I think, as best as you can. Yeah.
Was there ever an argument for you that you like learned where you were reading about one day that kind of like really shaped your understanding of the world?
Yes. Yeah. So I was a little disappointed by my philosophy degree by the 4th year, and I was sort of thinking to myself, like, okay, I'm not going to be able to do a PhD in this. I'm not going to be able to follow through because I haven't become a Kantian. I haven't become a utilitarian. I thought for the longest time that I would like embody one of these philosophies, and I would sort of start to really agree with it and feel myself digging my heels in. I just never did. And then I came across Indian philosophy from the 2nd to the like sort of 12th century. This is in South Asia. We're talking about Sanskrit philosophy, sort of proto-Hindu, the Vedic schools, and then the rise of Buddhism and Jainism in the 5th century BC. And then the development of this period, they end up having, by the 2nd century in India, they have all of these universities, much like we see universities today. They've got scholars at the top of these universities who are writing essays and commentaries on commentaries on commentaries, just like we do today. They're traveling around India, debating with each other, just like we do today. And the best arguments come out on top. And they're really like, they're engaged in metaphysics and epistemology predominantly, not so much ethics in the way we do it today. But this world of like Buddhist and Sanskrit philosophy talking about the nature of reality and the nature of change and of the way things exist, the ontology of things, that was the stuff that really blew my mind. And that's why I did a master's in that field specifically. In the Western tradition, the free will debate has always captured my attention, and still to this day is something that I'll discuss with my friends over dinner. So yeah.
That's really fascinating. So I'm disappointed that you had that one like almost throwaway line, maybe to others, but to me it was just like a dagger where you're like, they don't have much of an ethics discussion, because that was going to be the question I was going to ask you. Is like, well, if you could like identify a kind of like normative tradition out of it, what would you kind of say you've learned, I guess?
Yeah, and that is a huge thing that I just said. And actually, like half of my teachers are going to be like, no, how could he say that? And half of them will be like, yes, exactly. I'm glad I taught him well. I have a specific person in mind when I say that. This is a big debate. So some people think that the center of Buddhism and Buddhist philosophy is the ethics. And that ethics, well, it stems from the concept that there is no self. I think it's Anatman. It's the idea that there is no permanent self, that all we are is sort of changing phenomena. And then there are lots of things in Buddhism about compassion. I mean, if you read the Bodhicharya Avatara, which is Shantideva's main work, this is like Tibetan Buddhism a little later. It's just all of these chapters about how to be an incredibly gracious and empathetic and kind person and compassionate person for all living beings. And the concept of liberating all beings from suffering is at the core of Buddhist ethics. And you can have a debate about whether that means it's utilitarian or deontology, or maybe it's its own thing altogether.
Like, me, I'm just like, okay, so it sounds like virtue. It includes a little bit of anthro in there. Like, I'm like, okay, this is fun. I like it. Yeah, a little bit of like, it sounds like care ethics. A little bit like, yeah, that's interesting. That's cool. So, it sounds like you're kind of teaching and you're working with students all around the globe. So, what is kind of like a challenge of that for you, or I guess like a benefit?
The benefit is all the different perspectives, I think. I spent some time teaching Western philosophy to Tibetan Buddhist monks in northern India over one summer in 2023. And then I also go to China every summer and teach public forum debate. And just seeing the different ways, the different values that people have in terms of how government ought to operate, in terms of interpersonally, what's the most important thing, in terms of how business operates, all of these things are radically different in every culture, with maybe some fundamental things sort of at the root, but learning from all these different perspectives is incredibly interesting. And it does present a challenge sometimes, of course. Sometimes it's easier to teach certain things to certain people and vice versa. But I think learning how to deal with that is the most enjoyable part.
Yeah, absolutely. So you all have another project I'm kind of interested in. I've seen stuff about global AI debates. What can students kind of expect with that?
Yeah, so this is another branch. So this is more for debaters, I would say, debaters and public speakers. If you're really keen on that stuff and you want to stick with the debate world, this is a global competition. So teams from anywhere in the world can compete. We've run it for one semester now. We had judges from MIT and Perplexity and OpenAI and like these incredible, like just top heads of industry and heads of research as well in the field of artificial intelligence, basically, and ethics. And the way you engage, there are two tracks. One of them is an essay and then debate track. So you submit an essay for or against a topic, one of three, based on the age category. And then if you get through the first round, you're going to get another team's essay on the other side of the topic. And then you're going to rebut that in written form. And then if you get through that round, you go to the, I believe, octofinals of a live debate day, all online, judged by these heads of industry. And this is really a specific attempt to get people to talk about the key issues that are probably the most essential things to the 21st century right now, like the rise of AI and how it's going to influence the workforce and relationships and what it means for our society in general, and the potential like really high level risks at the tail end of the AI spectrum, which are quite terrifying. So yeah, that's what the Global AI Debates is aiming to do.
So the topics are like very focused on AI then.
Yeah, exactly. The senior one this semester is about basically human relationships with AI, whether that's going to be a good or a bad thing. The middle school one, or the middle topic, is about whether AI should be treated as a public educational resource by governments and provided for free in that sense. And then the junior one is about whether AI-enabled toys are good for kids.
Oh, interesting. That's like, I like that. I like the kind of scaling of that. So do kids like win? Is it like prizes if they win, or is it just like debate where you get like a trophy and kind of move on with your life?
Debate and trophies at the moment, and lots of feedback at every level with the essays that you're writing from these pretty high level judges. So yeah, and no, otherwise moving on with your life afterwards, which I think is the right thing to do at the end of a debate tournament.
Right? Yeah, you have to. You can't dwell on it too much. That's cool. So if students want to get involved in these, what should they do?
Yeah, they can go to tkethics.org. tkethics.org is actually the portal to register for all of these tournaments. Then the terribly named company that I have is called the Modus Ponens Institute, which is an
Okay.
argument form, a Latin name for an argument form. And yes, I do regret calling my company that because no one can spell it or repeat it back to me. But that's okay. If you look up the Pan American Ethics Olympiad, as is my name here, you're going to find that website. That has all the resources and the background stuff. But ttethics.org is where you would register. Also, the global AI debates.org has information about that tournament. So it's a little bit dispersed.
Yeah, and we can link all that in the description.
Cool.
That's cool. So do they have to register with their school, or is it individually, or how does that work?
Yeah, so there are actually two different ethics tournaments. So the global AI debates, that's separate. You can join however you like, private, with schools, or whatever else. Now, for the ethics competitions, there's the Olympiad competition, which has the international final based in Australia, and that is school-based. So you do have to be part of a school team for that one. There's a middle school competition coming up in November. There are the senior tournaments happening in March and April. But for the TK Ethics Invitationals, which is the same exact format, but it's just a different structure, basically. That can be any teams. They can be school-based or non-school-based. You can pull your favorite people from South Asia and East Asia and America and Australia, however you like, and you can build a team like that.
Okay, and it was 3 to 5 people, you said?
3 to 5 people per team, and then the global AI debates for the essay and debate track is 2 people. And there's also a public speaking track that I never mentioned for global AI debates, which is just a single person.
Okay. Have you noticed that people who do like world schools debate together like also compete in the Ethics Olympiad? Seems like it would kind of like lend itself to working together. Why not?
Yeah, exactly. Well, the Australian Ethics Olympiad, which is where it all started and where there's like sort of, I don't know, there's like 600 teams maybe competing in the Australian Ethics Olympiad. It's become like massive there. I think it's now bigger than the Ethics Bowl internationally. They obviously have a lot of debaters doing both of those things because we are running the Pan-Atlantic edition of this. So we operate in like Europe and now hopefully Africa is coming in and the Americas. Obviously, we don't have quite as much of that style. We've mostly been in North America, Canada, and the US. So honestly, the Ethics Bowl teams have been the ones who are currently doing the best. But I would love to see what happens when some high-level competitive debaters come in from Lincoln Douglas and bring their skill set and see how it changes things.
No, I think that would absolutely be awesome. Cool. Well, it's been really nice to get to know you and get to know more about this. Do you have any parting thoughts in terms of what kids should look out for or anything like that?
I guess keep being critical, keep thinking, keep debating, doing philosophy. These things are very, very good and particularly important right now, I think. So all of that, and then come and see if you can topple off some of these ethics bowl schools from their perch and bring in your skill set and see what happens. I'd love it to grow.
I think it'd be a lot of fun. I kind of agree with you, especially what you're talking about with like pluralism and just getting a lot of different perspectives, and it'd be cool to see people who have explored philosophy in such a different way for so many years, like kind of approaching a new problem, right? I know you met Scopa a little bit the other day. He's been just like talking constantly about how much he wants to like coach this activity, right? He's like, this sounds like what we've like always kind of wished LD actually was, in terms of like actually having framework debates and discussions about ethics, right? We tend to just have like extinction first, very like the smallest risk of extinction versus like completely conceded deontic framework, right? 2 ships passing the night kind of nonsense, so it's cool to see like actual engagement in real philosophy. So I'm glad you all are kind of bringing this to our attention, and I hope we can get some kids involved.
Fantastic.
Right.
Looking forward to it. Thank you so much for the conversation.
Yeah, have a great night. I will talk to you next time.
Absolutely. Ciao for now.